never thought a delayed flight would change my life forever, but standing in the marble halls of Denver International Airport at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, watching three security guards escort me toward an exit I didn't want to take, I realized some moments arrive whether you're ready or not. My name is Sarah Williams, and I'm about to tell you how airport staff learned the hard way that assumptions can cost more than they bargained for. The woman they were so eager to dismiss, she had resources they couldn't imagine, and a husband who doesn't take kindly to his wife being humiliated. You might want to stay for what happens next, because this story has the kind of ending that makes you believe in justice again. It started innocently enough. Flight 447 to Seattle had been delayed 4 hours due to weather, and the gate area was packed with frustrated travelers sprawled across every available seat. I'd been traveling for 18 hours already, coming back from a humanitarian mission in Bangladesh, where I'd been setting up clean water systems in rural villages. My clothes were wrinkled, my hair was in a messy bun, and I probably looked like I'd been living in airports for days because, well, I had been. The expensive first-class ticket in my phone meant nothing when you looked like you'd been sleeping in departure lounges. That's when I first encountered Monica Patterson, the gate supervisor who would soon learn that judging books by their covers is a dangerous game. She was everything you'd picture in an airport power tripper. Perfectly pressed uniform, clipboard wielded like a weapon, and that particular brand of customer service smile that never reaches the eyes. Monica had been watching me for the past hour, and I could feel her disapproval radiating across the gate area like heat waves off summer asphalt. The trouble began when I approached her podium to ask about meal vouchers. The delay had stretched through dinner time, and the airport restaurants were charging premium prices for questionable food. It seemed reasonable to ask if the airline might provide some compensation for passengers stuck in their terminal for hours beyond schedule. "Excuse me," I said politely, stepping up to Monica's counter. "Could you tell me if there are any meal vouchers available for passengers affected by the delay?" Monica looked me up and down with the kind of thorough assessment usually reserved for suspicious packages. Her gaze lingered on my worn jeans, my faded NGO t-shirt, and my beat-up backpack with patches from a dozen countries. I watched her make her judgment in real time, saw the exact moment she decided I wasn't worth her professional courtesy. "Meal vouchers are provided at management discretion," she said, not looking up from her computer screen. "We don't typically offer them for weather delays." "I understand the weather isn't the airline's fault," I replied, maintaining my polite tone despite the dismissiveness in hers. "But passengers have been here since 3 p.m., and it's now past 11. Some compensation seems reasonable." That's when Monica really looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her expression that I recognized from my years doing aid work in places where corruption was currency. It was the look of someone who'd decided that certain people deserved certain treatment based on appearances alone. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass and ID," she said, suddenly very interested in verifying my credentials. "There have been issues with people trying to access services they haven't paid for." I handed over my documents, watching her face change as she processed what she was seeing. My boarding pass clearly showed first-class seating, pre-board status, and a ticket price that probably exceeded her monthly salary. But instead of acknowledging her mistake, Monica doubled down with the kind of stubborn pride that turns small problems into disasters. "This seems irregular," she announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I'm going to need to verify this with my supervisor." Now, I've dealt with corrupt officials in war zones, negotiated with warlords over supply routes, and faced down armed rebels who wanted to steal medical supplies meant for children. A power-tripping gate agent wasn't going to ruin my day. But what happened next crossed lines that even my patience couldn't accommodate. Monica stepped away from her podium and made a call, speaking in hushed tones while maintaining eye contact with me like I was some kind of security threat. Within minutes, two airport security officers approached, their hands resting casually on their equipment belt in that universal gesture of authority preparing to be exercised. "Ma'am, we're going to need to come with us," the first officer said. He was young, probably new to the job, and looked uncomfortable with whatever he'd been told to do. "There are some questions about your ticket validity." "Questions about my ticket?" I repeated, loud enough that other passengers started paying attention. What kind of questions could there possibly be about a ticket I purchased directly from your airline's website 3 weeks ago? Monica had returned by now, and she was enjoying this more than she should have been. "Standard security protocol," she said with fake sympathy. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding that can be cleared up quickly." But it wasn't standard protocol, and it wasn't going to be cleared up quickly because this wasn't really about my ticket at all. This was about Monica Patterson making assumptions about who belonged in first class and who didn't, then digging in her heels when those assumptions were challenged. She'd decided that someone who looked like me couldn't possibly afford the ticket I was holding, and rather than admit her mistake, she was doubling down with security theater. The second security officer, older and clearly more experienced, looked skeptical about the whole situation. "Ma'am, what exactly seems to be the issue here?" he asked Monica, not me. I appreciated that he was at least trying to understand what he'd been called to resolve. "Potential ticket fraud," Monica replied confidently. "The passenger's appearance and demeanor don't match the class of service on the booking." Did you catch that? She actually said my appearance and demeanor didn't match my ticket class. In 2024, in a major American airport, a gate supervisor felt comfortable saying that someone's appearance disqualified them from the seat they'd purchased. The older security officer's expression suggested he'd caught it too, and he didn't like what he was hearing. "Has the ticket been verified in your system?" he asked. "It shows as valid," Monica admitted reluctantly. "But there are ways to manipulate these things. Credit card fraud, identity theft, that kind of thing." Now she was just making things up, throwing around serious accusations with no evidence because she couldn't back down gracefully. The younger officer looked increasingly uncomfortable, but Monica was his supervisor's supervisor, and workplace politics are complicated, even when common sense says you're being asked to do something stupid. "I'm going to need to see some additional identification," the younger officer said apologetically. "Credit cards, proof of residence, that kind of thing." This was escalating beyond reasonable into the realm of harassment, and I could feel my diplomatic patience starting to fray around the edges. "Officer, I've provided my driver's license and passport, both of which match the name on my ticket exactly. What additional identification could possibly be required to board a domestic flight I've already checked in for?" "Ma'am, we just need to be thorough," he replied, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. He was starting to realize he'd been called into a situation that didn't make sense, but Monica wasn't giving him an easy way out. That's when things took a turn that even I didn't see coming. Monica, perhaps sensing that her security backup was wavering, decided to escalate further. She picked up her radio and called for additional personnel, citing a disruptive passenger situation that required immediate attention. Within minutes, the gate area had transformed into a scene from airport security theater gone wrong. 3 additional officers arrived, along with a supervisor who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else dealing with anything else. Passengers were staring, some recording with their phones, and the whole situation had spiraled into exactly the kind of public spectacle that airports spend millions trying to avoid. "What do we have here?" the security supervisor asked, and I could tell from his tone that he was already annoyed about being pulled into whatever this was. Monica launched into her explanation about suspicious ticketing and appearance-based concerns, but halfway through her speech, something beautiful happened. The older security officer, the one who'd been skeptical from the beginning, interrupted her. "Supervisor Collins, I've verified the passenger's documents multiple times," he said firmly. "Everything checks out completely. The ticket is valid, purchased weeks ago, matches her ID perfectly. I'm not seeing any legitimate security concern here. Collins looked from Monica to me to his officer, and I watched him realize he'd been called to manage a situation that shouldn't exist. But Monica wasn't finished yet. She'd invested too much ego in this confrontation to let facts get in the way now. "There's something not right here," she insisted. "People who look like that don't fly first class on legitimate tickets. I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I can tell when something's off." And there it was. The quiet part said out loud. The assumption that had been driving this entire confrontation finally spoken clearly enough that everyone could hear it. Colin's expression went very still, and I saw the exact moment he realized his department was about to be involved in a discrimination lawsuit if this wasn't shut down immediately. But Monica had one more card to play, and it was the nuclear option of airport authority. "I'm refusing boarding based on security concerns," she announced. "This passenger will not be flying on my aircraft tonight." The gate area went silent. Even the crying baby seemed to pause. Refusing boarding is serious business in the airline industry, with legal implications and regulatory oversight that makes gate agents think twice before exercising that authority. But Monica had painted herself into a corner with no graceful exit, so she was going for the nuclear option rather than admit she'd been wrong from the beginning. Collins looked like he wanted to disappear entirely, but he was stuck mediating a situation where his officers had been called to enforce someone else's discrimination. "Ma'am, I need you to document exactly what security threat this passenger represents, because refusing boarding requires specific justification under federal regulations." "I don't need to justify my professional judgment to you," she snapped back. "This is an airline decision, not a security decision." "Actually," Collins replied, with the patience of someone who deals with difficult people professionally, "when you call security to enforce your decisions, it becomes a security decision, and I'm not comfortable with the justification I've heard so far." That's when I decided it was time to make a phone call of my own. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart, stepping slightly away from the group for privacy. The call was answered on the first ring. "Hi, honey. I'm sorry to bother you so late, but I'm having some trouble at the airport." Now, you might be wondering who I was calling at 11:30 p.m. from an airport gate while being harassed by overzealous staff. The answer to that question is about to change everything about the story, because my husband isn't just any concerned spouse. He's James Morrison, and if you don't recognize that name, you will by the end of this conversation. James Morrison owns Morrison Industries, a conglomerate that includes everything from renewable energy companies to tech startups to, most relevantly for this story, a significant stake in the airline whose gate agent was currently refusing to let me board their aircraft. He's what business magazines call a disruptive billionaire, the kind of person who bought his first company before he turned 30 and never looked back. But more importantly for this moment, he's the kind of husband who doesn't take kindly to his wife being mistreated, especially when that mistreatment involves the sort of discrimination that we both work to eliminate through our foundation's civil rights initiatives. "What kind of trouble?" James asked, and I could hear him shifting from sleepy concern to the focused attention that had built his empire. "Gate agent refusing boarding based on my appearance," I said simply. "Says people who look like me don't belong in first class." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds, which in James Morrison time meant he was already making mental notes about who was going to be held accountable for this situation. "Which airline?" he asked. I told him, and I heard typing in the background. James doesn't just own parts of companies. He knows people at every level of every industry, and he keeps very detailed files on who does what where. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. "Don't go anywhere." I hung up and returned to the group, where Monica was still arguing with Collins about her authority to refuse boarding, while the other officers looked increasingly uncomfortable with their role in the situation. "Everything all right?" Collins asked me. "Just calling my husband to let him know about the delay," I said truthfully. "He worries when my flights are late." Monica rolled her eyes. Ma'am, you're going to need to collect your belongings and leave the secure area. Your boarding privileges have been revoked. I'll wait for your supervisor to document the security justification for boarding refusal. Officer Collins said that was required for boarding refusal. And that's when my phone started ringing. Not just my phone, actually. Monica's radio crackled to life, Colin's phone buzzed, and somewhere in the airport's administrative offices, I guarantee you that multiple phones were ringing simultaneously as word traveled up the chain of command, faster than gossip in a small town. Monica answered her radio first, and I watched her face change as she listened to whatever message was being relayed from airport management. Collins was reading a text message that made him look relieved and concerned at the same time, and my phone was displaying an incoming call from James. "Sarah," he said when I answered, "I've just spoken with the airline's CEO, the airport director, and the head of security operations. There seems to have been some kind of misunderstanding." "That's one way to put it," I replied, loud enough that the others could hear my side of the conversation. "I'm also told that there are several videos of the situation already posted on social media," James continued, and now his voice had the edge that business competitors learned to fear. "The hashtag appears to be trending." Monica's radio was crackling with increasingly urgent messages, and Collins was fielding a phone call that had him saying, "Yes, sir," and "Understood, sir," more than any conversation should require. The other officers were looking around like they wanted to fade into the background, and passengers throughout the gate area were definitely recording everything on their phones. "Honey, I think the situation is about to resolve itself," I told James, watching Monica's face go pale as she listened to her radio. "Mrs. Williams, I've just received word from airport administration that there's been a significant misunderstanding. You're cleared for boarding immediately with the airline's sincere apologies for any inconvenience." Monica looked like she'd been hit by lightning, but she wasn't ready to surrender yet. "This is highly irregular," she protested. "I made a judgment call based on legitimate concerns." "Ma'am," Collins said firmly, "you're being relieved of duty pending an administrative review. Please report to the supervisor's office immediately." The transformation in the gate area was immediate and dramatic. The additional security officers disappeared as quickly as they'd arrived. Collins apologized to me personally and professionally, and Monica found herself being escorted away from her own gate by airport supervisors who'd materialized like magic. But James wasn't finished yet. "Sarah," he said over the phone, "the CEO wants to speak with you personally to apologize and discuss how they're going to prevent this from happening again." "That's not necessary," I started to say, but James interrupted me. "Yes, it is necessary," he said with the tone that had negotiated billion-dollar deals. "This isn't just about you anymore. This is about every passenger who doesn't look like what gate agents think first-class passengers should look like." And that's when I realized this story wasn't really about my delayed flight or Monica's power trip or even airport discrimination, though it was certainly about all of those things. This was about the moment when assumptions meet consequences, when small-minded prejudice runs headfirst into resources that can't be intimidated or dismissed. Within the next hour, I would be personally escorted to a first-class seat by an airline vice president who'd been roused from bed to manage the crisis. Monica Patterson would be suspended pending investigation, then quietly terminated as the videos of her behavior spread across social media platforms with the speed and fury of digital justice. The airline would implement new training protocols, sensitivity workshops, and oversight procedures designed to prevent future incidents of appearance-based discrimination. James would leverage his business relationships to ensure that other airlines adopted similar measures, turning my humiliating experience into industry-wide policy changes. But the most satisfying part of the whole experience came the next morning when I woke up in Seattle to find a news story about an airport gate agent who'd lost her job for discriminating against a humanitarian worker who turned out to be married to one of the airline's major investors. The story went viral with the speed of modern outrage. But, unlike most internet controversies that burn bright and fade fast, this one had staying power because it touched on something fundamental about dignity and respect and the assumptions we make about who belongs where. Monica Patterson learned the hard way that you never know who you're dealing with, and that treating people poorly based on appearances can have consequences that stretch far beyond the immediate moment. The airline learned that discrimination is expensive in ways that go far beyond legal settlements, affecting reputation and customer loyalty and employee morale. But the lesson that matters most, the one I hope you take from this story, is simpler and more universal than corporate policy or viral videos or even social justice. It's that everyone deserves to be treated with basic human dignity, regardless of how they look or what assumptions others might make about them. The woman those airport staff dismissed so casually wasn't just married to a billionaire. She was a human being who'd spent weeks helping provide clean water to people who needed it, who was tired and travel-worn and just trying to get home, who deserved basic courtesy regardless of her husband's bank account or business connections. The fact that she had resources to fight back when mistreated doesn't change the principle. It just means that this time, for once, the person with power used it to make things right instead of looking the other way. Because here's the truth that Monica Patterson learned too late. In a world where everything is connected and everyone has a camera and stories spread faster than wildfire, treating people badly isn't just morally wrong. It's stupid, risky, and expensive in ways that can end careers and change industries. You never know who you're dealing with. You never know who's watching, and you never know when a small act of prejudice might meet consequences bigger than anything you imagine possible. The airport staff regretted dismissing me, not just because I was married to someone with influence, but because they learned what happens when assumptions crash into reality at 30,000 feet of consequences they never saw coming.